Chapter 8. Johnny Appleseed. Let us begin. Sudeep. Oh, you are back from the interview. Maindeep. Oh, yes. It was a lovely experience. Sudeep. Did they like your science project? Maindeep. They hardly talked about it. Sudeep. What did they ask you then? Maindeep. They asked me who my science teacher was. Sudeep. And what else? Maindeep. How he teaches the subject and whether I like him. Sudeep. What was your reply? Maindeep. I told them how enthusiastic my teacher is and what an inquiring mind he has and how he guided me to do this wonderful project. Sudeep. I'm sure you have done well. Let us read. Apples remind me of a very special person. He was called Johnny Appleseed. Actually, his real name was Johnny Chapman. He lived a long time ago when his country, America, was very young. He is an American folk hero, and to this day, people tell stories about him. People say that when Johnny Appleseed was a teeny tiny baby, just an infant in his mother's arms, he was delighted in the pink and white blossoms of the apple tree. He'd point to the flowers and cry and holler until his mama broke off a blossom and handed it to him. Then he would coo and giggle and fall asleep with the blossom in his tight little fist. He was the oldest of 10 children. Imagine the noise in his house that drove him into the forest, where it was quiet and peaceful. The animals sensed his gentleness and would join him. He'd sit under a tree, and rabbits would appear. Hippity, 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 hop, hippity, hippity, hop. Squirrels would run circles around him. Do-loo-loo-loo-loo, and deer would peek at him from behind the trees. Johnny knew how to care for sick animals. His granny had taught him how. He could remove thorns from paws, mend broken wings, set broken bones, and nurse sick baby animals back to health. Johnny loved the forest and the animals, but even more than those, he loved the apple tree. He learned about apple trees from his neighbor, Mr. Smith, who had an apple orchard next to Johnny's cabin. From the time Johnny could talk, he drove poor Mr. Smith crazy with his questions. He had so much to learn. I know that you ask a lot of questions too, right? We all know that we learn by asking questions. One day, when Johnny was helping Mr. Smith plant trees, he looked up at him and said, "Someday I'm going to plant apple trees all over America. The apples will feed hungry people, and the trees will make America beautiful." Mr. Smith smiled at Johnny and said, "Johnny Chapman, I believe you will." That's when Johnny began to collect apple seeds. Johnny collected seeds. Oh, Johnny collected seeds. Hi-ho, the apple. Oh, Johnny collected seeds. Years later, when Johnny had grown into a tall young man, he packed his belongings and put his precious seeds into a huge deerskin sack. He said goodbye to his parents and brothers and sisters and walked out the front door. "Wait!" shouted his mama, holding a cooking pot. "What will you cook in?" "I don't have any room for a pot," said Johnny. His mama plopped the pot on top of his head. "Emo!" He smiled, and off he went to plant his seeds. Johnny will plant the seeds. Oh, Johnny will plant the seeds. Hi-ho, the apple. Oh, Johnny will plant the seeds. Johnny planted trees and made friends everywhere he went. He always had exciting adventures. Children loved Johnny because he always had stories to tell, apples to give away, and seeds to plant. One day, a little girl saw him coming and shouted, "Here comes Johnny Appleseed." The name stuck. After that, everyone called him Johnny Appleseed. There are many stories about Johnny. Let me tell you just one. One summer morning, when he was walking with his sack of seeds and his pot on his head, he heard a whimpering sound. He looked down and saw a little wolf with his leg caught in a trap. Johnny loved all the animals. He wasn't afraid of the wolf and he knew how to take care of him. He bent down, opened the trap, and gently lifted out the broken leg. There, little fella. I'll fix you up in no time. My granny taught me how." He made a splint, bandaged the wolf's leg and stayed with him until he could walk on his own. Then he packed his sack full of apple seeds, put his pot on his head, and took off down the road. Johnny didn't have many belongings, and most of the time, he didn't even wear shoes. In the summertime, he enjoyed the pit-pat sound his feet made on the forest floor. He walked away from the wolf, pit-pat, 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 pit-pat. He stopped for a moment and heard pit-pat, 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 pit-pat. He walked on, pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. He heard it again, pit-pat, 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 pit-pat. He was wagging his tail and looking up at Johnny with sorrowful eyes, as if to say, "Please take me with you." "Well, come along," Johnny said. "There's work to be done." He found a wolf one day. Hi-ho the apple, and now he wants to stay. The wolf stayed with Johnny for many, many years. He even helped him plant his seeds. The wolf would dig a hole with his front paws, and Johnny would drop in the seeds. As the years went by, Johnny planted trees all over Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Those trees gave food to the hungry families moving west. Johnny's dream was coming true. He planted trees for a long, long time until he was a very old man with long white hair and a long white beard. Then one day he said, "My work is done." Johnny died under one of his beloved trees. And now it's our turn to carry on Johnny Appleseed's tradition and to plant trees. Just think, if each one of us planted a tree every year, our earth would be